Rob second of his 2 talks. And he's one of the curators of the exhibition here, and the archivist for Shepley Bulfinch. He has been with the firm for 43 years.
43 years, yes.
Yeah, good. And so he's going to be sharing a little bit more about his life at the firm, what it's like to archive our materials, and also just wanted to let you know that we're recording the session today. So if there's anything that you'd like to share, we also have a couple participants who joined us online through Zoom. So when we get to the Q&A portion, I can either pass the microphone around, or if you'd like to head up, that'll make sure that everybody participates in the conversation. I can't pass the microphone around, so you'll have to step up to the mic. Thank you.
Tiny squares.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Welcome, everyone. My name's Rob Roche. I am the archivist at Shepley Bulfinch, or when I was hired on April 6th, 1981. I was working for Shepley Bulfinch, Richardson and Abbott, or SBRA. That was the name of the firm at the time. I was brought onto the firm to take on a very interesting task, and that's to review and maintain the entire architectural history of the firm, from drawings to photography to general information about the projects the firm had worked on. And one of the firm's strengths through the years from H.H. Richardson's original start was that all the material that the firm had been collecting through the years, the drawings, the artwork, became a very important, useful part of the firm's history and the firm's future. The great part about all the material that we use as firms that we've worked with in the past, such as O.W. Norcross, the Norcross brothers, all the construction work that they did for Richardson, all of that information was well maintained through the years, and we used it all the time. Different things like doing Trinity Church were constantly called back to do more work on the projects, and that has been a basis for the firm's longevity. Once we established clients, we continued on with them, and Harvard University is a good example. From Richardson's initial start with Austin Hall at the law school, we were constantly becoming a part of their campus development through the years, onward into all of the river houses in Cambridge. Those were all a major part of the firm's growth through the years. One of the most interesting parts about my work is not just the drawings and history and photography, it's the people that have worked through the years. Since I've been with the firm for 43 years, I'm sort of like a living legacy to tell the stories about all the people and how they've grown as a major part of the firm, right from like Carol Wedge, for example, starting out in the mailroom, just like I did, and moving up through her presidency in the firm. It was just great to see all of that change through the years, giving people an opportunity to grow within their time at Shepley. I've been around for 43 years, and there's many other people that have been with the firm that have actually put in a good amount of their time learning and teaching others to move up the ladder. So it's been interesting to see that from my perspective. I'm not an architect, I'm not a designer, but I got to watch everything from the outside. And along with that, I got to see young designers coming up with new ideas and new styles. It was great to see how their projects move forward from beginning to end. And of course, the best part about it is that material gets called on all the time. Whether it's a past client or other architects, they constantly contact me to try to get into some of that background and history and it actually leads to more work for the firm. So it's always good to have that active collection to be a useful tool within the firm. It's been nice through the years to hear a lot of the stories that came out of past people that have worked with the firm. People like Phil Levy, who was a draftsman that started out in the 1920s. He used to tell me stories about interesting things that were done during the summertime in the Ames building where we were first located. Of course, it was just a 13-story building, but no air conditioning. And if you're working there in the 1930s, he said in the summertime, the dog days of summer, it got quite hot. So they used to go up on the rooftop to just enjoy the nice view, the pleasant breeze. And then people like Hugh Shepley would tell me stories about if it got too hot, there were actually a couple of the young draftsmen that were working, and the only way they could cool off was to strip down the skivvies and jump into the water tank that was on the roof of the building. It was a fast way, and then just lie out in the sun and dry off, and then back to the boards by 1 o'clock. And it was always sort of interesting. We're just accustomed to everything nowadays with air conditioning and humidity control and everything, but it must have been a tough time to be sitting at the drafting board and trying to get your work done when it was, over 100 degrees in the dead of summer. So a lot of fun stories come up all the time about some of these different things that the people used to go through. I also learned a lot of interesting things when I first started working with the firm from some of the drafts people, different things like shooting rubber bands and tacks into the ceiling and other interesting sort of things that you learn going along the way. I became a master in fixing things like maylines because everything was hand drafted, changing the ammonia in the deazo machine to make blueprints. Those were all sort of tasks that I learned and continued with through the years, and then taught younger generations how to deal with some of that. Now everything is technology. Everything's on computer. Everything is digital. Everything is virtual. But the best part of my responsibility is pulling out the material that actually was hand drafted back in the, from Shepley, Rattan and Coolidge after Richardson's death. Maintained all the original drawings on linen. This is an example of the linen drawings here for New York Hospital. It was meticulous work that was done by the draftspeople, and they had to learn how to do things right the first time, because you make a mistake on a linen drawing in ink, you had to do it again. So it was actually sort of a trial and error as people were learning the practice of architecture before computer technology stepped in. And since I started in the 1980s, I got to enjoy that slow transfer of the artistic end of things into the technical end of things. But we still have that entire collection to share and to use. And of course, it's always wonderful when we come up on key points. I got to celebrate the firm's 125th. Now I'm celebrating the 150th, and we'll see where we go from here. Any questions so far?
Do you store the models?
As far as models are concerned, we only have a few that have lasted basically a lifetime. This is all made out of hardwood. It's all, of course, enamel paint.
That's the original model.
That's the original. Originally, we had the entire base with all the outside buildings and the whole campus, but that actually started to fall apart. So I retained this one and have kept it. It's sort of like a major part of the archive collection. Most of the one nice part about the firm and its collection and its history, photography was a major part of the firm's collection. Every building that we complete, every model that we do, every sketch They'd all be either hard copies kept of it, the actual drawings, or in a lot of cases, material would be photographed on a regular basis for the project from beginning to end, from photographs of the sketches and renderings to models that were made for it. We'd also have a full series of construction photographs, which are absolutely fascinating to look at. I've got like 2 volumes of New York Hospital, since it was a series of 11 buildings done right at the height of the Depression. That was the main focus of everything that we were doing around that time period. And that led to many other projects. Of course, we did this, and the campus right next door is the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. And we developed that whole campus through about a 30-year span, building after building. So I've got a whole series of photographs just showing up the timeline. It's just fascinating material to share, to review, and in a lot of cases, it's been published in a lot of different books and architectural articles about preservation and history. So it's always great to share that material on a regular basis. Let me just take a second. Excuse me. Some of the other things that I was always fond about, I became not just the archivist for the firm. I ran the mailroom for a number of years. I worked with the marketing department all the time, as they're always looking for background information on anything we ever did. I was a walking historian, basically. If anybody had any questions about styles of architecture, from classical design to brutalism, we've done a little bit of everything. Just like Richardson would quote, "I'll design anything from a chicken coop to a monster cathedral." I have examples of a lot of that material, and it gets used all the time. We always have a lot of architectural students in on a regular basis. They want to do their thesis on Trinity Church, so they want all of the CAD drawings that Richardson worked on. And it's sort of hard to explain to a young student that he really wasn't well versed in CAD at the time. So it's always nice to pull out the material that I do have on file. And of course, I share a lot of time and effort with a lot of other architectural historians, colleges and universities. There's always questions coming in on a regular basis. And the ones that are the most satisfying is when I get contacted by a person that just bought a house on Fisher Hill and Brookline that Shepley, Rattan and Coolidge did in 1884. They're wondering if I have plans for it, and of course I have plans for it. So it's just great to see their fascination when they come in and actually look at what the building looked like when it was originally done. And then they get very upset when I show them the accounting ledger that shows what the building cost was. So that's another factor that gets used on a regular basis, is all that background information that the firm has retained through the years. I've got that all in a central collection where the archives is still at 2 Seaport Lane. It was an office building we did in 2000, Ralph Jackson designed. And at the time, it was the first office tower in the Seaport District, and nobody was renting it. So we got a bargain price on the office space, and they gave me penthouse space as an added bonus. So when we moved out of there, they actually let me keep my collection all in one place. It's in the penthouse of the building. And after 43 years, that's what I deserve. So it's always nice to have people in and to take a look at some of that material on a regular basis. We have constant clients coming back to review the material if they're doing renovations or additions to existing buildings. I have all that as a main source for not just our firm, but for many other firms and clientele through the years. And the collection is extensive. It's pretty much every single project the firm has worked on from after Richardson. All the Richardson material was donated to Harvard University. It's at the Houghton Rare Book Library and the Harvard GSD. has a large portion of the collection as well. But everything after that done by the Boston office is in my hands. So it's nice to be able to use that and share that with anybody that has an interest. So it's been a fascinating career, and we'll see where it goes from here. Any questions?
Other than Trinity Church, what are the notable buildings that should get?
Multiple requests. A lot of people are just fascinated, of course, with this display. Everybody wants copies of a lot of the material. And the amazing part about some of these things is people just don't realize the extent of work that the firm's done through the years. You know, something like Logan Airport or South Station, Harvard Med School, the entire Longwood medical area. You know, I can keep going through project after project. And it was nice with the firm's 150th anniversary. We got all of our offices all across the US together. We had a major celebration at the BPL. And then I got to brag about all of our past history. We've done, of course, the map that you see on the glass over here. It's sort of like a walking tour of a lot of the buildings in the downtown Boston, Longwood medical area, and Cambridge. So if you're interested in taking, you know, your own time, take a look through some of that material, you'll be fascinated just in the downtown Boston area. You can see all of our buildings, all through all of the, you know, late 1800s, 1900s, and early 2000s. Things like Mass General Hospital, that entire campus, it's all of our work. Terry?
Thank you.
You want microphone? Sorry.
No, thank you. You teed it up when you talked about Longwood. And I just wanted to tease out a little about Children's Boston. Are they probably kind of over the centuries, perhaps our most constant client?
One of our constant, that's one of the nice things about the firm through the years is, thank you, Terry. The firm, once they established a client like Children's Hospital, we did the original hospital building for Children's that was completed in 1913. And of course it's still there, the Honeywell building. But year after year, the campus slowly developed. New buildings were brought in, old buildings were torn down. And of course, we just finished the most recent project, the Hale building. Thank you. It's their newest bed tower that's we just completed. That puts the number of projects at that one client. It's well over 120 projects. Not 120 buildings, but change this, move this. We'll build a new tower. We'll move departments around. It's been an ongoing relationship that the firm has had with that. And there's many other clients that we have that same rapport with. Places like Yale New Haven Hospital, and of course Harvard University. That all of the projects are in the hundreds for all of those clientele. So it's like an ongoing. Charles Coolidge is a good example. He and the president at Harvard University, when they started developing the river houses, Charles Coolidge was the architect, the executive architect for the entire campus for well over, let's see, it started in the 1920s all the way through the 1960s. And some of the newer designers that work for the firm, like Jean-Paul Carling, started changing the campus instead of these Georgian river houses. Carling started doing vertical towers for residential design and libraries and dining halls. That was all a part of that campus change through the years. So, and we keep getting called, but we actually did a full renovation restoration of the Lamont Library that was recently completed. So we go back to an old building that we did, 50 years ago and bringing it up to current grade. And other universities like Wellesley, they're just regular clientele. The Clapp Library was done by Shepley, Ritchie and Coolidge, and we've modified that a half a dozen times, and we're still working there now. So it's always been a major reason why the firm has continued on in its years. We just have a good stable base, and we keep things going. And as the firm got on to the newer generations, we started Carol Wedge, who was the president at the time, first female president of the firm. I was used to working with, Hugh Shepley and Jimmy Clapp and some of the other partners that were, running the firm when I first started. They started handing it off to the younger generation, and Carol Wedge managed to work her way up from the boards to associate, senior associate, and eventually was elected as president of the firm. She had a broader vision and started branching the firm out to other locations, like our office in Phoenix, starting out with a small firm that was there. They just needed a hand to get along. They had their own sort of style of architecture and different types of work they were doing, like residential towers in the Phoenix area. We got involved with them. They joined us. And since then, we've actually opened other offices. We have an office in Hartford. We have an office in Houston. I keep thinking, Carol. Durham. Keep forgetting the Carolinas. So we have an office in Durham. And we're all working virtually now. Everybody's working online. So it's a lot of interaction between all the people in different locations, but we're one firm as a whole. And that has been very useful to have perspective from outside the old Boston office that it used to be to statewide, worldwide. We actually got into work in other countries, such as Ireland, and we're working in Chile right now. So we've branched out an awful lot, but we have a lot of talented people from all different aspects of architecture. It's nice to get everybody to group together and come up with interesting ideas and schemes for future work. So.
What examples of work have you done?
North Carolina, the firm that we joined with in North Carolina, they have a strong background in science and technology. So we're getting involved with them, but we also have some background history, things like Vanderbilt Medical School. The president of Vanderbilt at the time was G. Canby Robinson, who had a good relationship with Henry Shepley. We did the Vanderbilt Medical School in the 1920s, and then Robinson moved to New York to take over the Cornell Medical Center, and he hired Shepley to do New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center. So that aspect continues along. Leadership among our clients, they start out in one place, they move somewhere else. It keeps the business moving around. So it's interesting to have that aspect. Fred?
This is a question of Gesundheit that I've been curious about for years, and I figured this is a good time to ask that question to you. Now, we all know who the Shepleys are. There they are. Who is Bulfinch? I mean, I know the Bulfinch, but who is this Bulfinch?
This question comes up all the time. Thank you for
All right.
asking it. A lot of people come in and asking me if I have, plans of the State House or some of the buildings that Charles Bulfinch designed and built back in the mid 1800s. And it saddens me to tell them that Shepley Bulfinch is not Charles Bulfinch's firm. Charles Bulfinch was already retired, passed, gone. the Bulfinch at, Shepley Bulfinch is Francis Vaughan Bulfinch, who was a, direct descendant of Charles, but the two firms had nothing to do, with one another. Francis Bulfinch, and I've got some fun stories about him. He would have the young, draftsmen shaking in their boots if they had to deal with him. He was, masterful at, construction administration, and, I have some fun photos of him with a, old-fashioned telephone up to his hand and, yelling at the contractors, about blowing the budget on, Northeastern University. Just different things like that. And as I had mentioned about Phil Levy, he wrote some fun stories about, how people would, like to go, out of the Ames building, to Court Square. There used to be a number of, fresh brewed coffee shops. It wasn't Dunkin' Donuts in those days. But freshly ground beans and coffee. So they make jokes with Bulfinch when he'd get angry that they were leaving their drafting table. He'd say, "Where are you going right now? It's, still in the middle of the day. You should be on the boards." And one of them would, pull out ruler and say, "I'm going to measure the tunnels in the subway. I'll be right back." So he'd run off, get outside, go over and get coffee for everybody in the office, bring it back, and then ask Bulfinch if he wanted coffee too. So there were all kinds of interesting stories about him always watching out over, making sure everybody was on the boards and doing their job right, and that construction costs would come in on budget. He was a stickler with that, but he was masterful at making sure that the buildings lasted the way they were supposed to. And a good example, of course, is Northeastern. He was a major part of the whole development of the Northeastern campus. And of course, all of those buildings are still standing up to time, and that gray speckled brick that Henry Shepley just loved so much. So it's a good example about, it was a commuter's college when it was first done, but now there's a lot of interesting new buildings that are going up on the campus to make it a international university. So it's nice to know we started with the beginning, and it's grown so well since then and maintained. Fred?
Just a follow-up, was this the first merger of Shepley?
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, is this the first merger of Shepley? Shepley actually, I'm not going to consider it a merger, but of course, when Charles Coolidge, with Shepley, Rattain and Coolidge, when we won the Leland Stanford University project, Charles Coolidge went out to California and lived there while that campus was being developed. And he found, he told George Shepley and Charles Rattain, "You know what, I sort of like traveling around. I like meeting people. I like doing sort of my own thing on the side." He stopped in Chicago on the way back, and we won the Art Institute of Chicago and the Chicago Public Library competitions. So Charles Coolidge set up his own office of Shepley, Rattain and Coolidge in Chicago. So that was sort of our first branch offices. And then another one was opened in St. Louis. But as far as mergers are concerned, the most recent ones with Arizona, Phoenix, and then Texas, and then we opened an office in Hartford and in North Carolina. Those were all done within the past 15 years, I think. That's a ballpark estimation. And that's where we stand today. Any other questions?
How did the Stanford project?
I can tell the story verbatim.
Or
Leland,
you can make it up.
well, actually, that I've been told I could do
I would love
that
to.
by a lot of the principals through the years, because I get up and I talk about the firm, the people within the office all the time. And Sid Bowen used to joke with me about just making stories up. Nobody's going to be able to check them, but Terry Evans is here, and she knows all parts of the firm history.
She's
So
back.
yeah, exactly. But the story about Stanford University, Leland Stanford, he lost his son to polio, I think. he died of polio. And of course, Leland Stanford was very upset about losing his child. So he decided, I'm going to build a university for people in California to use, just like Cambridge has Harvard University. And so he supposedly went to the president at Harvard and said, how did you do this? I want to build one just like yours, but I'm going to do it in California. And of course, the Harvard folks sort of said, we're not going to help too much. You'll be competition. So Stanford decided, because we had relationships of developing Harvard campus, I'll hire Shepley or Coolidge, and they can come out and they can build me my own campus. And that's when Charles Coolidge moved out, came up with that sort of Spanish style of architecture. Charles Coolidge was masterful. He had learned all of this through his years at it wasn't Harvard that he studied at. He did study at Harvard, but he also studied at Mass Institute of Technology. MIT had a great program for design. So he learned all the aspects of working with Richardson and going to college about all kinds of different styles of architecture. So he started to introduce different things like that. And that's how he got involved with the Stanford project. So he moved out to California, and according to Charles Coolidge, he'd spend nights doing all the working drawings, and it'd get shuffled off to the contractors during the day, and they'd build things, and he'd get right back on the boards at night. So it was like a constant back and forth until that inner quadrangle at Stanford was completed. We were also called back to do the Memorial Tower. It was actually an archway that was at Stanford, but that actually came down in the earthquake of 1906 because Mrs. Stanford, Leland Stanford, had passed away. Mrs. Stanford took over the project, but she hired a local architect to do it, and he didn't follow the standards of Charles Coolidge's design, so it actually didn't stand. But the original inner quad stood up like a pyramid. I guess that's the best term to use. And of course, the campus has been developed since, based on Olmsted's master plan with all the outbuildings surrounding the inner court. And beautiful campus, and it's still in wonderful condition. So it's always been nice for many years. I think over 20 years, we did a centennial series of posters. We picked a project that was reaching its centennial, go off, photograph it, printed on large poster format with embossed dates and the Shepley Bulfinch name across the bottom, and handed it out to clients and associates that we had through the years. So that was always a fun project that I was involved with, is bringing all these rolls of drawings and tubes and stuffing them in cardboard tubes and putting labels on them, and then using the mail machine to spit out all these little postage labels and then mailing them off. It was like a major undertaking that usually lasted 2 to 3 months. So that was an interesting little side project that I worked on through the years, and we produced those posters for close to 30 years. So got a lot of that collection. I'll start posting them on Instagram or something, see if anybody wants to buy one. Some money for the archives.
I have a question.
Sure.
Last time you spoke about some of the artistic hands in some of the earlier drawings and renderings.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if the archives themselves, you can follow an architect's style for 30 years of drawings.
Absolutely. In whether it's the perspective that you see at the top of Smithsonian South Quadrangle, that section, that's Paul's son's hand. Paul was principal with the firm, but he was really well versed in perspectives and axonometric drawings. Just his style of pen on vellum, and then Prismacolor pencil for the coloring toning of the sky and such. he became masterful. I could produce a whole book on his styles of trees and grass and all the little detail that gets into that project. Very, very talented perspectivist. And we have a number of other people through the years. Back in the Shepley Retaining Coolidge era, it was D.A. Gregg did a lot of interesting drawings and perspectives that get used all the time. We have some from the Ames family, some of the work that we did in Northeast, and he did a lot of the perspectives for those. I think there's a little boathouse I've got a nice rendering of that was done by D.A. Gregg. So I have a lot of different artists through the years, whether it was watercolor or ink on vellum or Prismacolor, or in some cases it was interesting things like some of the graphic material, stick-on letraset and other things like that. There were a lot of interesting styles of architecture that we used in artistic presentation. So that answer your question?
Yeah.
Dan?
Well, first a comment and then a question.
Okay.
The comment is, it's a thank you to Rob, actually. I started at Shepley as a energetic graphic designer in the mid-2000s. And sort of under Carol Wedge's direction, shepherding a lot of the change that she envisioned for the firm. And one thing that I always appreciated about Rob is anytime I asked for something, he'd always give me more than I would ask for. And anytime I wanted to change something, it was always, at least I think from Rob's perspective, it came from a place of understanding about a changing landscape and architecture and design, and how the firm was following, I think, an exciting trajectory. And so that requires a lot of trust because there's a lot of risk. So my question is actually related to that almost directly. How does a firm over 150 years strike this balance between longevity and health and being willing to take such risks, sort of continually reinventing itself?
It's a good question. Thank you. It's actually always been interesting to see, since I have the full perspective of the firm from H.H. Richardson through current day, times change. I've seen a lot of situations where, one moment we've got 1,000 clients and busy as we can be, we can't hire any more people. And then a few years later, we have recessions. And I've been through at least 5 cycles of this. And I'm still here just because I know where everything is. But it's always interesting to see how the firm changes. At one point, we were very busy with office buildings throughout downtown Boston. And then, of course, the Depression came around. And at that time, the leadership said, well, we're not doing speculative buildings anymore. We just can't survive something like that. We've got all these other architects in Boston that are going out of business. Let's work on projects that we know will keep going, whether there is a recession or not. And, of course, that brought on our mainstay clientele for healthcare and for academics. There always seem to be jobs for those 2 key points. So that was sort of our base. And then we started branching off to try other little things. But as an example, in the 1970s, there was way too much inflation. There was absolutely no buildings going up. People weren't doing anything. The firm was down to, I think, about 50 people at the time. And I've had other stories from, again, Phil Levy. I should write a book about him alone. Back when the firm was down to, I think, about 8 people total during, the lowest of the low point. But the firm continued on. and we adapted changes. We started to sort of trial and error different types of things. Like in the 1970s, we got multiple projects for New England Telephone of all places. They were doing all these little brick buildings for all of their control centers in every single town. I'm sure a lot of you, if you come from little small towns, you always see those simple little brick buildings. We were popping them up everywhere. So that kept the firm busy. And then when times started to change and money got better, we'd go back to the larger scale projects. And then in the 2000s, we started getting into mega sized projects like Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center. It was a brand new medical campus from ground up. So people like Lloyd Acton, who was a healthcare design, just had this masterful concept on how to develop this campus, turn it into a medical mall so that everything would be there, the classrooms for the students, all of the medical inpatient, outpatient. It was all combined through this one centralized structure so that you could, it's one-stop shopping basically for healthcare. And that led on to other major developments that we started doing throughout the United States. So times change, style changes, clients change, but throughout all of that time, we've maintained that original series of clients that keep coming back to us on a regular basis. Our masterful technique within library design, that's always been a forte of the firms. So it's nice to know that the clients appreciate our work and they know who to turn to if they need a major project like that done. We're usually one of the first on the list of to get checked in on. That answer your question? All right, thanks, Dan. Any other questions? Mr. Shepley.
Well, it's funny, you reminded me of many things as we were talking, just like there's an old family story which may or may not be true. You might actually know the truth, but during the Depression, my grandfather, Henry Richardson Shepley, the family story was that he kept his two best draftsmen and they actually built kayaks for a while.
Yes, yes.
Because there was no other work to be had.
Yeah, Shepley and Voss, Herman Voss, Harry, Herman Voss. When there wasn't an awful lot of work going around, Voss was always sort of interested in that style of Eskimo kayaks. So he and your grandfather came up with an idea, design concept. And one of the interesting facts that I actually have is I have this rendering of Mass General Hospital White Building when we did the White Building for Mass General. If you flip the board over, there's actually a sketch of that kayak. It's a plan and it's a section in scale. And as the story goes from old recollections that I have on file, Voss came up with different ideas about what to use on the framing, different things like canvas and different types of roofing cement to hold it all together. And the design, he sort of perfected it. They tried it on the Charles, made sure everything was stable. And then they started selling them individually made, custom made, just to bring in money to keep the firm moving. And Abercrombie and Fitch actually found out about this, thought it was a very interesting design. So they said, we'll put it in our catalog, just like Sears Roebuck, for people to buy for $250 a piece. So I've actually have a copy of the original catalog with that Eskimo kayak that got developed. It was the patent it wasn't patented, but the idea was sold to them. So that's where it stands at this point.
Wow.
So there's probably some still floating around out there. We'll see.
Roger had
Well,
it. He rebuilt it.
Yeah, right. So there's at least one that we know of. Yeah.
He built it. I'm not sure. That's Roger.
And then I had one other question, which is that I think you and I grew up in the analog generation and now everything's digital. And I just wonder what your thoughts are because you have this wonderful archive and I assume that from sort of today on, it'll be mostly on computers. And I wondered what your thoughts were about how that was good and how that was bad.
It's, I think, just like you can see hanging around us, the material that dates back to the earlier years, like Shepley, Rattan, and Coolidge and such, that was a form of art, like the rendering of the elevation section of the YMCA, the linen drawing that's right there. It was a form of artistry. And if you go through that entire set of drawings, you have elevations, you have sections, and then you have interesting details like that. The draftsman that actually did that, they knew that that was their piece, and they would put every effort into making that recognizable. We had talked a little bit earlier about recognizing people's style and drafting. I've got drawing lists, books that were kept. So every single drawing, it would specify that, the front entrance elevation section, it would have their initials, the draftsman's initials on the drawing book when it was drawn, when it got sent to Norcross Brothers to construct the building. Every draftsman that was working at that time wanted to put all kinds of flair into the drawing. So we've got different types of letterings and style and coloring and background. It was like a pure piece of art. And then in the 1920s, they started to get into standardization. Same size drawings, everything was the same, title blocks with the same type of lettering, drawing numbers, drawing name, location. So it got to be more organized. So it went from art to drafting. But again, as you're noticing, people that actually did the drafting, there's a little box to put their initials in on who drafted it. I can recognize 1,000 draftspeople by the style of their drafting or their lettering. Everybody has their own sort of style, and I can recognize that after working with the material, which is always interesting, because I can be going through a set of drawings that were done in the 1980s, and I can tell you who drew them just by sight. So it's always fascinating to get into that sort of aspect. Any other questions? Did everybody have a chance to enjoy the entire display? There's actually more material down on the back. There's fun pictures of me when I was just a squirt starting out with the firm. So if there's no more questions, I thank you all for coming. Hopefully we'll see you again here, and we'll do it every 10 years or so. So thank you so much.